Hi, I'm John Billingsley, and you know me probably mostly from Star Trek Enterprise, but I've also played any number of serial killers on various bad crime dramas. And welcome to Spoiler Country.
Hello, listeners of Spoiler Country. Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Mr. John Billingsley. How's it going, sir?
It is going pretty damn well. 35% of America is vaccinated. Woohoo!
I'm glad to be one of them. I'm double vaccinated with Moderna, and I'm feeling good about the whole thing.
Me too. Here's to the vaccination passport. Let's wade into an immediately controversial issue. Vaccination passport. I'm all for it.
Well, hopefully not controversial to anyone who actually listens to us, because I don't see the argument.
I wouldn't think so, but it's going to be, of course, a point of controversy.
Indeed.
It already is, Good God.
So which was yours? Everyone wants to know, was it Pfizer? Was it Moderna? Was it Johnson & Johnson?
I was Moderna, and of course I set a couple of days aside thinking that I was going to have the kick in the ass that some people have complained about, but absolutely fine, no after effects whatsoever. I think when you're old, your immune system has been battered and beaten and kicked around, that it can't really quite rally the way the youngsters' immune systems do. From what I'm experiencing, from what I'm told, it sounds like the younger you are, the more likely it's going to kick your ass, that second shot.
Well, I will say I got the Moderna vaccine as well. This was back in February, and I was knocked on my ass for about 40 hours, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I hear. More people. I was fully expecting to be knocked on my ass, and then nothing. I was like, oh, fabulous, huzzah! So yeah, we actually a group of guys that I play poker with. We are all old. We've all been doubly vaccinated. We've all gone through the requisite. It's been at least 2 weeks for most of us. So we got together the other night. Every single one of us was vaccinated, and it was like I just wanted to kiss them all, even though I'm not attracted to any of them, just because I could. It was so much fun. We had beer. We hung out. We were still outside. I guess it's going to be weird. Old habits are going to die hard.
Yeah.
But to have that sense of like, oh, remember this? What it was like? It's back.
Well, I made the choice. I got my second vaccine during February school vacation. Like I said, I'm a teacher. Anyone who doesn't know that by now who listens to the show. And I thought to myself, after I got knocked on my ass, I was like, I really wish I had done this during the school week so I could take in a couple of days off. Instead, it ruined my vacation.
Yeah, I got it with my missus and I both got it. We're on the same schedule, and she didn't have any after effects either. So yeah, and because we'd taken 2 days off, was like, what do you want to
do? That's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
I still wonder whether they still don't seem like they have a lot of information on whether or not you can still carry as a vaccinated person.
They are now saying that it appears to be much less likely that you're a carrier.
Good.
So, yeah, and as I said, just to be clear, in the get-together where I felt like kissing all the guys, all of us had been vaccinated.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'm still a masker and a 6 feet awayer and only eat outsider and, and of course, the other great unknown is the extent to which the vaccine is going to prove efficacious against some of these awful variants. The variant coming up from Brazil, which is unfortunately terrifying. And
Brazil, Africa, England, unfortunately.
Yeah, the English variant is now actually the primary virus here in America. So that's not even a variant anymore. Michigan, I think, particularly is being hit hard by it. So yes, that is a concern. But I think the Brazilian one right now is the one that really is to me kind of the most gulpy, because Bolsonaro is a clown show and doing absolutely nothing down there, and it's really marching up South America. That's where it's like gulp.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Well, my wife has yet to be fully vaccinated, so someone who has asthma a lot, so I'm a little worried about taking it home to her, but I'm hoping that the other variants are a little bit like the flu, where if you're vaccinated, even if it's not from the strain that you're affecting it should be far more mild and survivable.
Exactly. And that is the thing, is that even if you contract COVID, it's so much of what the driver of all of this has been: keep people out of ICUs.
Yeah.
And that is proving, at least here in California, for instance, to be very, very true. We suddenly the danger of no ICU beds is gone.
Yeah.
We're not seeing hospitalizations. We're not seeing deaths. So, worst case scenario, if you have the vaccine and you get flu-like symptoms, hey, we've all gotten the flu a lot.
Right.
More. We can live with that.
In my opinion, the important thing is, can you survive it? If you can survive it, you know what? Screw it. If you're sick, you're sick. If the vaccine keeps you surviving it, then you know what? Do it. There's no reason not to.
Having said that, I know some people who have long COVID, and that's pretty fucking awful. It's like what's that? Chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
Months and months and months, and you're still basically barely able to get out of bed. So I still think vigilance and carefulness has got to be the watchword. And
I would also say,
3 cheers for Joe Biden. Hip, hip, hooray.
Right.
Hooray, hip, hip, hooray.
And I would say, too, the quicker everyone gets vaccinated, the less chance of new variants popping up. The fact that it's in the population as long as it has been has opened the door for further and further variants, which is what's the big problem actually is.
Yeah. And I love it because, there are people who are going to be coming on saying, I can't wait to hear John Billingsley, epidemiologist, told more. And here they are.
Well, as Dr. Phlox, he plays one on TV. If he plays one on TV, it counts, God damn it.
That's true. It took me a year and a half to learn how to pronounce endocrine system correctly. It was like endocrine. For some reason, I couldn't get that word.
Well, hopefully they wrote that out of the script for you to do you a favor.
No. Au contraire. Once the producers get wind of the fact that you can handle polysyllabic language, they're throwing the goddamn barn door at you. It's like, you bastards.
So, that
has been the curse and the blessing of my career is that people perceive me as being a brainiac, so they cast me as brainiacs, but I'm not really a brainiac. So now I've got to handle all of this kind of like gobbledygook. It's like, oh my God. What?
So I guess some people wonder, is Shakespeare more difficult to perform or the tech jargon that you're stuck with when doing a sci-fi program?
Well, they each present different challenges. No, I mean, certainly Shakespeare because of the complexity of the thought you have to carry. It's not just the language. It's that Shakespeare's extraordinary, unrivaled ability to weave a multitude of different ideas and associations and themes and metaphors into a single speech requires a tremendous set of skills. To understand it, to speak it clearly, to make sure that you're speaking it with an appropriate pace so that it's dramatically complex and legitimate, that it's coming from a human being who's supposedly thinking this on the fly, but it's still comprehensible. That's what makes the great writers so great and so very, very difficult to do justice to.
So have you performed Shakespeare on TV or film?
No, not on TV, not on film. There's a fairly limited audience here in the States, at least, for classical theater on film. And my career never got to the elevation where I would be thought of for roles in those kinds of plays anyway. It's going to go to extremely well-known and prestigious classical performers in those few instances where those kinds of things are going to get made. But I did, have a stage career for some time. So I certainly have, some passing familiarity with most of the classics.
I've interviewed some people from Star Trek, Armin Shimmerman, J.G. Hertzler, and there's so many of them who've done Shakespeare theater. And it's amazing to think, because I don't think people who perform in sci-fi get the recognition they deserve for the skill of acting it takes to do it. And it's amazing how many very highly skilled theater actors and Shakespearean actors have done Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I entirely subscribe to this, but I will say that certainly I've heard this theorized that, particularly when you are having to act through prosthetics, that you do have to have certain skills that are classical skills. Your diction needs to be extremely strong. There ain't no mumbling, when you've got a rubber head on. Well, hard enough. And yes, I think there is a certain kind of, and again, this is something that I've heard Star Trek actors speak to, that you have to have a certain quality of theatricality to be able to essay an alien. And, not to say that the people who aren't playing the human beings on Star Trek aren't doing wonderful work, But if you're an actor and you're playing a Klingon and a whatchamacallit and a dingle dongle and a yada yada, there is a level of craft you have to be able to bring those beings to life, I think. Yes. And yeah.
So when you're performing, we'll go into more Star Trek later, but I was wondering.
Acting ain't easy, period. I mean, it doesn't matter what the fuck it is. It's a wonderful thing. I love doing it. I'm glad I got to spend my life doing it, but it ain't no walk in the park.
So when you're practicing when you're playing Dr. Phlox and you're practicing without prosthetics and with prosthetics, is there things that you did before you put on the makeup that you realized you couldn't perform that way once the prosthetics were added to you?
No, but I was lucky in that respect. I mean, Armin, a perfect illustration, he had a mouthpiece. So anybody who's got, or as they call it, an appliance, anybody who's got an appliance that you have to learn how to talk around, there's a certain amount of practice. And of course, once you've worn it for a while and you've gotten acclimated, it becomes easier. But out of the gate, you have to learn how to enunciate and how to elongate, perhaps, or elaborate your words based on the fact that you've got a big goddamn denture in your yop. And that can be true for, I think that was true for the Klingons. If you ever played a vampire, right. I did not have a mouthpiece. So although the appliances, nose, forehead, chin, ears, could get a little sticky and it could get a little hot, perhaps, I did not ever feel any discomfort, and I never felt like it was affecting my ability to use my facial expressions.
So when did you know you wanted to be an actor? Like, when did that acting bug bite into you?
I've told this story so many times. I'm afraid I've been like a podcast slut of late. So, you're like sloppy fifths. I hate to say it. So
no worries.
So for those folks who are like, I've heard that story 100 times now, I should probably change it up. But in the fifth grade, I had moved from Louisiana to Connecticut. My family moved me. I had no say in the matter. And I had this thick Southern drawl, and I talked like this, and I had a lisp too. And so needless to say, I was, ostracized by all the brutish northern children who wanted to beat that accent out of me. And I thought of myself as the class pariah. However, I read a lot, even as a child. I was a big reader. So they had a mandatory set of auditions for the class play, A Christmas Carol. And I was about the only kid who could pick up the script and read it aloud and make any sense of it, much less put any emotional qualities into it. So I was cast as Scrooge, and for one brief, shining moment, I got to experience what it was like to be a star. And from that moment on, purely through the crass consideration of, I want the glory, I want the notice, I decided to be an actor. And then my parents very graciously sent me off to study with some acting teachers in New York, and I fell in love with the work for the work's sake. So from a very early age, I was pretty bent on being an actor.
So is it an indictment on our school system that none of the other kids could handle the script for The Christmas Carol?
Well, as a teacher, forgive me, but yes, I will indict the school system up front. I won't indict the school system per se. I will indict our culture. I will indict our society. I will indict anti-intellectualism generally. I will indict Yahooism. Yeah. I think there's a great swath of the powers that be in this world who would just as soon see people kept in relative ignorance because it makes for a compliant, cheap labor force.
I agree with you 100%. This is one of the issues where a lot of people are anti-college. It's not because of the college itself. It's the liberal ideas they're teaching you that they don't want you to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, I was very, very lucky. So much, one of the reasons I spent a lot of my time working for not-for-profits is because I really feel like there, but for the grace of fucking God, go I. I had smart parents who loved to read. And from the time I was a little kid, I would go and sit in the living room on the floor at the base of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and just think, I want to read those books. I didn't really understand what reading meant, but I saw my parents buried in books all the time, and I knew how much enjoyment it gave them. And that wall had such totemic power to me. It's like the way some other kid might bow down to fucking, the Graven statue of blah, blah, blah. We had no religious iconography in my house, but that bookshelf was the be all and the end all for me. So I learned to read at a very early age, and you know, I don't fault the public school system, but it was my parents that made me fall in love with reading. And I'm much more, I would say, an autodidact than I am a product of a great educational system.
I think one of the best gifts you can have are intelligent parents. My father and mother were educated people. My father, the reason I do writing is that watched my father write on the computer, and I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm like my dad. And my readings because they wanted to read. It's the best gift you can have growing up is intellectual parents.
And they wanted to read to me. And that was the other thing, is that my parents read to me. From an early age, my mother would read me stories. And I so wanted to become a reader. It was, and still is. If I look back on my life and there was one thing I would say that I'm most grateful for, it's that I learned to love to read at a very early age. I wanted to be a librarian. I wanted to live in a library.
So you later attended Bennington College. What was your area of study in Bennington?
Well, and ironically, at the time when I was in my late teens, I always kind of had a pudding face. So I thought, is there really a career for me in the arts? I don't know. A guy looks like me. My other interest was in writing. Yeah. So Bennington College had a lot of girls. That was my third interest. I'm going to a girls' school. God damn it. So I applied to a bunch of girls' schools, got into Bennington. They had a tremendous writing faculty, including Bernard Malamud, Nicholas Delbanco, Stephen Sandy, George Garrett, particularly Malamud. So the good news was, oh my God, I get to study with some of these great writers in relatively small classes. My class with Malamud, there were 6 of us. The bad news is when you're that age and you're studying with great writers, it's limp dick syndrome. It's like if you're studying acting with Olivier, you would come away feeling like, wah, wah, I can't act.
Yeah.
So oddly, my reaction to studying with great writers was it made me more convinced I should be an actor.
So as a backup plan, you chose writing. That sounds like a bigger risk than acting.
Well, you know what David Mamet says? If you have a fallback position, you will fall back on it. So I never had a fallback position, and I frustrated my parents to no end. One, they wanted me to go to college, and I said, I don't want to go to college. I want to go act. I want to go to New York. I want to go act. They forced me to go to college, so I compromised with them by saying, all right, send me to a girls' school so I can get laid, a place with a good acting program, and no grades, and I'll agree.
That's an interesting stand to take. I need to get laid before I...
Oh, yeah. I was like, that was number one with a bullet, as I suspect it is in every 18-year-old virgin's mind. It's like, I don't care what I learn. I want to get laid.
I never tried that I should have tried that with my parents. Send me to a school with all girls, and I promise I will graduate.
I didn't rub my parents' puss in it, but at a certain point it became apparent. It was like I was applying to like Vassar and Connecticut College and Bennington. It's like, what are all these schools have in common? It's like the Dartmouth catalog came. It was like I burned it in the fireplace. There's like one woman in the entire school. But then when I got out of college, I started acting. My parents were like, "You've got to take a word processing course. You've got to." It's like, no, I'm not. I am not. I will live on piss. I am an actor. Period.
So your parents weren't for it?
They were extremely supportive in the sense that they always loved me and they always cared about me and they didn't want me to suffer. I think and I learned this in later life, they were fucking petrified that I had chosen to make my life as an actor. And the cool thing was, I always knew that they were there if I was in a pinch. And I was never poor in the sense that I knew I had this, great safety net, them. But I also was a theater actor, and I learned to live on nothing. I knew the stores that gave away free samples. I knew who to scrounge a beer from. I always lived with roommates. The rent was next to nothing. I didn't care about possessions. I didn't care about what I wore. I have to say, one of the things I always sort of, if I'm ever asked, I'm not asked all that much anymore because I'm not as much of an actor as I used to be. But when I used to be invited to go to schools or blah, blah, blah. I'd say one of the great things you can do is learn to love to not give a fuck about the shit that other people give a fuck about. You don't need a car. You do not need a fancy pants suit. You do not need 90% of what the world thinks it needs to be happy. Then you can act, because then you can spend all the time that other people are working, doing what you love, acting.
So obviously there's a great risk to pursuing the career of acting. The percentage of those successful is lower than maybe in a lot of professions. Was the risk real to you, or were you just that confident that you would be the one who's successful?
Well, it was a combination of things. There are all sorts of ways you can have an acting career. It depends upon what satisfies you. I mean, I started theater companies. I found that work enormously rewarding. I didn't make a penny. I was an acting teacher. I did regional theater. I did small house theater where you might make $150 a week. All of that work was great and wonderful fun, and I would not have become a better actor if I hadn't done it. I just didn't make any money. But if I defined my life in my own terms as not needing a lot of money.
Gotcha.
Now, in fairness, I reached a point in my late 30s when my first marriage ended, and I thought, I don't know if I want to be an artistic director anymore, and I really don't want to teach acting anymore, when I had to ask some questions about how do I generate more revenue as an actor, and that got me into film and television. And once I started having success in those mediums, then I made a lot of money.
Yeah.
And then I started having a radically different life. I still feel like my values haven't significantly changed. I still don't really care about a lot of the things that other people care about. I wouldn't know what the fuck to do with a Lamborghini. But one of the reasons I spent a lot of time working in the social services is because I for many years knew what it was like to not have a pot to piss in. And I knew that if I didn't have my parents to fall back on, as I did, I could very well have ended up in situations that a lot of people end up in, where it's like, I don't know where I can't make the money to pay the rent. I mean, we live in Los Angeles with a huge homeless population, and a number of those people are mentally ill, a number of those people have drug and alcohol issues, but a number of those people simply can't afford to live in one of the most expensive cities in the country.
I mean, a great gift is the ability to self-reflect upon oneself and one's means. Do you think that helps you as well as an actor to look at yourself and think of how you can connect to the characters that you're performing by being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I know of myself, so I can bring that to it?
And that's the greatest gift. I mean, I was an acting teacher for many years, and frankly, it's like 9 out of 10 guys that come through a class, they're not going to become professional actors. But what it does do, the study of acting, is it teaches you empathy. It says, put yourself in the other person's shoes really deeply. Not just in the kind of casual way we say, well, think about walking a mile in the other person's shoes. That's not just 5 minutes of like, yeah, that would be a bummer. It's actually delving into what it would genuinely be like to live another person's life by working on texts in which that experience is dropped down to your gut. Now, what is it like to want to kill somebody? What is it like to have your heart deeply broken, knowing you'll never repair it again? What is it like to? What is it like to? What is it like to? It's a great gift as a human being to understand what it really means to experience empathy.
So empathy is the difference between playing a character and inhabiting a character, would you say?
Yeah, if I'm understanding the distinction you're trying to draw, yeah. I mean, playing a character, from the way you phrase it, you mean that as sort of a pejorative, as if that's not really as deep an expression of the work as inhabiting a character. But,
right.
But there is a reality, which is that you have two obligations. One, you have an obligation to draw as deep a personal connection to the material as you possibly can. The other obligation is to make sure you're telling the story, which requires craft. And that's where the actual ability to not let your personal experience get in the way of your professional obligation. You have a professional obligation to be heard in the back row. You have a professional obligation for your diction to actually be legitimate. You have a professional obligation to make sure that you are not over-stressing things to the detriment of the text simply because your personal experience is so deep.
Do you think, you said when you went to Bennington College, you focused on writing. Did that help you as well as an actor? Because I assume the skills are similar.
Reading has. Reading has, no doubt. I mean, not everybody's going to want to go take an acting class. But to me, if I had to say to somebody, what can I do to become a better human being? I would say read, because every book is a human being presenting himself to you. And in the end, your willingness to grapple with every possible story under the sun, that's what empathy is. That's where it comes from.
That is awesome. I don't think I've ever heard it phrased that way before. That's brilliant. Good job. That is very interesting.
I don't know. That to me is I'm my wife makes fun of me because I'm there are people who say, well, I read a book and if I don't like it after 20 or 30 pages, I chuck it because there's so many books, you don't have that much time. Why waste? My lived experience though is that there are books that I have had to wrestle to the ground because they're hard and they're deep. You can't read Proust thinking that you're going to fall in love with it after the first 5 or 10 pages. The first 30 pages are all about the experience of, I've often said, it's the worst book to try and read in bed because the first 30 pages of Proust are about a guy who thinks that he's actually fallen, he's awake, but in fact he's dreaming that he's awake, and he wakes up and he realizes that he was actually dreaming. It's really hard not to fall asleep when you're reading that. Right. You have to persevere. But at the end of this mammoth project that is Remembrance of Things Past, it's one of the greatest and most beautiful and intensely moving experiences you'll ever have as a reader. It's true for so much that is great. It's true for Faulkner. It's true for George Eliot. It's true for all the great writers. They ain't beach reads. And there's a place for beach reads. There's a place for a great spy novel. There's a place for a great mystery novel. There's a place for I don't want to sound like I'm a book snob, but some of what really deepens your understanding of what it is to be human is reading a great writer. And a great writers ain't easy.
Well, you're talking to an English teacher, so be as snobby as you want about reading. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great one to say, for me, like kids. I mean, when I was a kid, I read Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and Analog and Fantasy and Science Fiction. I had 20,000 comic books. I read pulp magazines, and I read some good books too. I just read. Yeah. And I think the best thing you can do to a kid is say, read, just read. I don't care what it is. Just read. You'll develop your taste. Once you fall in love with reading, you'll develop your taste.
I agree with you 100%. I grew up when the first thing I read as a kid was comic books, and I still read comic books. And you know what? I don't care. That's reading. That's literature. That got me reading now Shakespeare and Poe and Dante and all the greats. Yeah. Started with reading Batman. I don't care. That's true.
Yeah. Well, I know. And it's funny because I'm like 60 years old, and some of the stories that are deeply ingrained in my consciousness are memories of individual comic books.
Yes.
When Superman, Lois Lane goes blind and Superman marries her, and then he comes into contact with red kryptonite. He becomes ugly. Lois Lane gets her sight back, and he feels so terrible that he ostracizes himself to an asteroid because he's too ugly to live with beautiful Lois Lane. Why do I fucking remember that? Like every panel of that comic book, I remember.
But it's amazing what sticks with you. That somehow, somewhere deep in your brain, made an effect on you, and you've been changed because of it.
Yeah, exactly. And just as equally, I can remember these extraordinary, complicated, dense books that I've loved too. But they all of it is in me. All of it made me. So. But yeah, if you can't take an acting class, well, one, if you're going to take an acting class, you're going to have to read, because there ain't no way to do justice to a good play without reading it. I've never met an actor, really, honestly, I've really never met an actor who was a good actor who didn't love to read.
So I read, was your first on-screen appearance in the movie 7 Hours to Judgment?
Probably, yeah. It kind of blurs. Back in the early 80s, I'd moved to Seattle. There were a couple of films that I did more or less around the same time, but some of them were kind of like, local actors' vanity projects. So that probably was the first thing I did that actually was like a, studio film. Terrible movie, though.
So it started, the famous actor Beau Bridges. Are you able to watch a great actor when you're starting out and see what he was doing to make him great? And were you able to study him as an actor?
Not in that particular instance, because one, I make fun of myself all the time, and I can point to my oeuvre, and I feel like it's like corn niblets that are picked out of a turd. I've been in some pretty cruddy movies down the years, and with all due deference to Beau Bridges, who has become a marvelous actor, that was one of the stinkier ones, and I was miscast as a kind of tough pawn shop owner. And I was like 24 years old. I was like 8 pounds, sopping wet. And I was pulling out this rifle and saying, I'm going to get you, chasing him around. There was, I won't say I was self-conscious, but I will say I was very full of my own need to play act an effect. I didn't have, yeah.
Well, was there an actor before you kind of broke out and became, John Billingsley that we all know? Was there an actor that you looked at while that you performed with and said, I'm going to model a bit of my style after what he's doing or she's doing?
I don't think I probably would put it like that, because I don't think it's the challenge of learning how to act is learning how to absorb some principles that seem really simple, but aren't. One of the key principles is you are always in action. The idea of acting is, what are you doing? What are you fighting for? What are you trying to achieve? Why is it important to you? What are you going after? Always put it in active terms so that you're always involved in the pursuit of something, because it keeps you out of your head. Because most of the time, what happens when acting goes bad is you're worrying about the effect. You're worrying about what you're trying to look like. You're worrying about manifesting an emotional state. It sounds simple, but it's really hard to think in active terms, because action is actually extremely specific. The best actors are extremely specific, beat to beat to beat, based on what their action is. So you don't really help yourself thinking about, oh, look at that actor, I'm going to try and in any way copy him, or think about what effects he achieves. How can I achieve them too? You really just have to keep practicing the concept of identifying clearly what the action is in a scene and personalizing it so you can get behind it and feel committed to wanting to achieve it. And the other, while I'm on this, no one ever asked me acting centric questions anymore.
No worries.
The other thing that I think is key is moment to moment. It's really hard. It's very human. It's very human for us to say, oh, I fucked up. And you start obsessing and you start thinking, oh, I fucked up. Oh, that beat. Oh my God, I should have. Oh, I meant to. Well, now you've just fucked up the next 10 beats, the next 10 little moments. And now you're really panicked. Oh my God, now I fucked up this whole scene. Oh my God, I fucked up the whole fucking scene. Now I'm going to fuck up the whole play. And pretty soon it's like the worst performance of your life. Being in the moment is so very hard. It's harder in a way on stage, because on camera, when you've kind of fucked up a moment and you feel you've gotten in your head, you can always kind of like, fuck. All right, cut. Let's go back. I fucked that up. I'm off. You can't do that on stage. On stage, you just got to go. And in all candor, one of the reasons I'm not really much of a stage actor anymore is because I came to quite love film and TV acting, because I found it easier to be in the moment, because I felt like there's a safety net.
So as an actor, when you're in the role, then are you kind of, I'm trying to the best way to phrase it, you're not quite thinking while you're performing, or are you deeply still thinking during the performance? And
it's like you're driving two cars at the same time. There's some part of your conscious brain is cognizant that it's a performance. You have to, because you have to hit your marks. You have to, perform a set of physical actions. You have words you have memorized. It's not improvisational. But another part of you is able to really give over to the experience you are having in the moment, based on what you're getting in the moment from your acting partner. And it does feel like the so-called illusion of the first time. When both of those things are happening, it does feel, I don't know if transportive is the right word, but it does feel it's a very blissful sensation. You feel like it's like when you successfully patting your stomach and your head at the same time, or doing, or juggling, or doing anything that requires you to do something extremely demanding and physically arduous that involves your whole fucking being, and you know that your brain and your body are in sync weirdly. That's what it feels like. It can be very hard because sometimes you're so in it that it's like, Charlie, cut. Hey, Charlie, you didn't match. If you're on camera in a scene, you do a master. And in the master, you're having a sandwich, and you're having the bites where, at the end of line A, at the end of line B, and at the end of line C. Well, when you go to the close-up, you have to have the sandwich. You have to eat it in the same spot. Otherwise, they can't cut back and forth between the master and the close-up. So there's a technical capacity that you have to have while being in the moment.
It's just when you really think about it, I think a lot of people don't, as fans, don't always appreciate just the complexity of what you're watching on screen when it's done, especially when it's done well. I mean, once again, you're talking about yourself in the moment and being there, but you also have to act against another person who has to be in their moment, and somehow find this way of syncing up each other in a way that is probably hard for those not actors to fully understand.
Yeah, it's where you have to have a very deep. I mean, obviously on television, you don't have a lot of rehearsal time. Frequently the scripts are tissue thin, so it's not as if, you're doing Shakespeare. But still, you do have to have a real understanding of what the scene is designed to achieve. In a way, you are riding a boat down the rapids, but you are contained by the banks of the river. So there is freedom in the ride, but the constraint is the text. You don't get to fucking just kind of like, oh, in this moment, I'm going to start to cry. It's like, no, that ain't the journey, man. That ain't, that ain't possible for you. So the behavior that arises, it has to be honest, it has to be real. And there may be occasions when all of a sudden a behavior emerges that you would not think would have been legitimized by the text, but that is in the moment. But generally speaking, you're operating with constraints imposed by the text. So there's freedom, but there's with great freedom comes great responsibility. You are responsible to the text.
So you're also in one of my favorite episodes of one of my favorite TV shows of all time, The West Wing. You're in the episode, somebody's going to the emergency, somebody's going to jail, which is one of the great big block of cheese episodes that West Wing was very known for. And you played a cartographer on the show.
Yes, cartographers for social justice, as I recall.
And a couple of things a few questions. First off, before I get into some of the details of it, is have you ever heard of such a thing? 'Cause I never heard of even that was a thing until I never heard of Gauls, Peters, and projection maps and different looks of it until I watched the episode.
Yes, I had heard of the Peters projection map.
See, for me that was totally brand new. And the thing with the West Wing, Sorkin is so well known for the dialogue that he does, the clip of it, how it has to be perfectly timed and interacted. I mean, in many ways, people talk about Sorkin's dialogue, performing it the way you would talk about almost in some ways Shakespeare performing that. It's very particular.
Yeah, and it's very interesting from show to show. I mean, perversely, Star Trek, the executive producers on Star Trek were very persnickety. There was no improvising on Star Trek. It was, every syllable, as written. Sorkin is famous for it. David Kelly is famous for it. David Milch, a bunch of writers who are, within this medium, I think great writers take very, very seriously. Most writers do. I mean, very, very few TV shows give you much latitude to improvise. Every now and again, there are shows where I think Stargate, for instance, for me at least, was one where they kind of gave you a little bit more latitude. And there are shows where certain actors, particularly on sitcoms, can be given a little more latitude in the moment because their ability to improvise is notable and valued. Generally speaking, though, yeah, you got to know your words. Anthony Hopkins famously says, read the scene 100 times so that you know it cold. And you think, 100 times. Try it. That's a lot. That's a lot. Sorkin is definitely somebody for whom you better have your damned words down.
because of it's so specific on how he handles the rhythm and the pattern of the dialogue, does it make the acting slightly more difficult? Because now, once again, you're got to focus on a delivery way, which may not be natural to you as an actor.
No, because I mean, here's the thing. That's sort of like that's the river. That's the river you want. Knowing what the work is always the work. It's what do you want? Why do you want it? You know, how are you going after it? The style, the what Stanislavski kind of called a tempo rhythm, the nature of what it is that you have to figure out musically is a craft question. So yes, when you're Gilmore Girls, everybody on the Gilmore Girls pretty much talked at a clip, and you had to really be ready with your lines, and you had to be right on it because she was like designed. She had that show designed to get 3 jokes in for every other show's 2. So you knew that whatever decision you made, whatever animated your character, you had to build in that there was a reason why that person talked very quickly. On a Sorkin play or on a Sorkin script, I think one of the things you do is you say, for instance, in that scene, although I did not feel I was under any time constraint, but a scene in a Sorkin piece, you might say, okay, I'm only going to have 2 or 3 minutes with the president, so I need to make sure that I marshal my material and present it very, very concisely, because if I start to hem or haw or stutter, he's going to cut me out and I'm going to lose the chance to speak. So you've justified in an active way why you are speaking with a tremendous amount of precision.
Well, also when you're playing like in the West, when you played against Allison Janney and Bradley Whitford,
yeah,
the show, yeah, did they give you pointers on how to handle the dialogue?
No. I mean, no one ever will. Honestly, it would be any actor would take great offense to another actor in any way, shape, manner, or form coming up to them and suggesting this is how you should do anything. That is a big no-no in our trade. You assume that it's a professional situation, that everybody is there because they have professional experience and that everybody knows their job. If anybody is going to say anything to you, it is the director and only the director, or occasionally the writer, if the writer is the person who, as is sometimes true, kind of is in essence serving as the director. No actor should ever give another actor a note. It's the height of bad form.
Is it hard to walk into somebody's house, as it were, and perform into their show because you got to catch up to how the rest of the rhythm of the cast behaves?
Not usually, because, especially, if this is what you do for a living, it's your job. And so, you're good at it. There are times when it can be tricky. There are times when you get a rewrite. David Milch was famous for rewriting an entire scene the night before and showing up and giving it to his actors that morning. There are actors who are, James Woods comes to mind, who have a tremendous ability to look at a script and absorb it without having to spend a lot of time with it. Most of us need to spend a lot of time with it. And particularly as we get older. I mean, I take a lot of time with the script. I walk around with it. I read it. I rehearse it. I think about it. I try it different ways. When I show up, I am ready to work. And if somebody gives me a note, I'll take the note. If you get fucked by, through no fault of your own, most actors are very sympathetic to that and appreciative of what you're struggling with. But generally speaking, very, very few sets you're going to show up going like gulp. Some people, I did of all things, stupid show, Diagnosis Murder.
Okay.
But Dick Van Dyke was a hero of mine. I grew up watching the Dick Van Dyke Show. Watching him trip over the goddamn ottoman.
Yeah.
So when he kind of tap dances his way onto the soundstage, it was one of the few times in my career I was like, that can happen every now and again.
Yeah.
Doesn't happen too often.
So when you are a guest on another show, how much prep time do you have to prepare for your scene? Do you have it weeks ahead, days ahead?
Varies. Generally speaking, if you're, sometimes you'll get offered a part. Usually you're auditioning for a part. So you'll have the sides, if not the full script, maybe a week or so in advance. They'll cast you with anywhere between 4 days and 8 days notice before you're going to shoot, depending upon the shooting schedule. So you got plenty of time to prepare. what will happen is that the script will go through, umpteen revisions, and they send out different colored pages, green pages, purple pages, blue pages, yada, yada. Usually they're quibbles, little tiny things, but you always have to make sure you're checking the pages, because it is not impossible that the scene has been dramatically rewritten. And sometimes that will happen the night before.
Yeah.
You hate it when it does. I mean, it's an awful feeling.
Yeah.
This happened to me a few times in my career, not a lot, a few times, where it's like I've shown up the next day. It's like, I just got this rewrite the night before, and I don't really have it. And it's like, you do the best you can. But that's when it's like you're kind of like finding ways to write some of the lines down on the set somewhere, or, they shoot it in bits and pieces and paste it all together. It's a terrible feeling. You hate it.
Is it weird that scene in The West Wing where you're playing the cartographer is so well remembered? Because as someone who's a big fan of The West Wing and watches, it's in some groups as well, that's one of those scenes that people show clips of all the time, that moment.
Well, it's funny because different fans of different genres know me for different things. And so, yeah, I get West Wing a lot. There are people who, like their crime shows. I was on a couple of episodes of Cold Case that I guess were pretty memorable, where I was a particularly creepy villain. So it really varies depending upon who you're talking to. Out of Time was a movie I did with Denzel Washington that wasn't the greatest movie. It was kind of a fun movie, and it was a fun bar. And Denzel has this huge fan base. So, I get that a lot. Some of the things that I was, it's a perversity of this business. Possibly the thing that I enjoyed doing the most in television was a short-lived, hardly watched at all show called The Nine that only got 13 episodes. And it was a lovely part for me, and a really great ensemble, and had a lot of variety to it. And I was very proud of my work, and it flopped. you know? So there you go.
Like, do you ever know when you're doing something whether or not it's going to be successful or not? Like, can you tell at all?
Not really. No. I mean, I've been around for a long time, so I've got a lot of credits, but I never, there are rungs on the ladder in this business. The next rung up from me, or the next rung up from the rung up from that, Stephen Root comes to mind. An extraordinary character actor who works all the time in very prestigious projects because everybody wants him. That wasn't my career. I worked pretty consistently, but I usually had to audition, and maybe 70% of the time I was, secondary or tertiary guest star on whatever crime drama happened to be on the air at the time. So I don't mean this to sound excessively self-negatory, but I don't look at my career and go, oh, look at me, all the wonderful, prestigious projects I was in. There weren't a lot, I made a nice living doing a tough gig, but I have no illusions as to where I ended up on the pecking order.
Well, you're definitely forever famous for your role of Dr. Phlox on the Star Trek Enterprise show.
The show that killed the franchise.
I don't agree with that, but I know what you're saying. But it is I think the show does seem to have gotten people, I think, look at it better as time has gone on, because I know there's been a lot of talk in groups of talking about getting it on the Paramount Plus and getting a new series as it connects to Discovery and all this other stuff. And I do think it's been viewed far more positively by the fan base now that time has passed on.
That probably is true. I mean, I definitely think there was a certain amount of Star Trek fatigue when we came on. There really wasn't a break between Next Gen, Deep Space, Voyager, and us. I think Bran and Rick were a little burned out, in all candor. And we were on UPN, which itself was a network that was all but turning its toes up. I mean, other than wrestling and us, they had nothing. And in fact, one of the things that, killed us is most networks, the affiliate stations all over the country, they have a contractual obligation to air the network's programming. They can't pick and choose whether they're going to air, whatever show is on. UPN, because it was such a weak sister network, couldn't actually demand that of the affiliate stations. So we found out that affiliate stations all over the country were simply not airing us. We had a convention in San Antonio fairly early on, and Dominic and I think, showed up. I'm not sure if there were other Enterprise guests, and nobody came. And we found out it's because, well, it never aired in San Antonio. They canceled it every Friday night to show high school football. So I think that's one of the reasons that the audience, was not as robust. But yes, I have heard from a number of people that there may be a greater appreciation for it now.
And it's such a different looking show than the other Star Treks. I mean, it felt a little darker, as it were. I mean, it had the look of almost being in a submarine versus the glorious ships of the other.
Yeah,
program.
Yeah. I mean, I've often said that I wish they'd kind of, even gone farther with that. I mean, to me, some of what made the show potentially interesting was that because we were the first crew, we weren't as incredibly competent as other crews were. Not that we were klutzes. It wasn't like, yahoos in space, but we were scared of the transporter and we weren't entirely sure what to do when we bumped into an alien culture. And I would have liked maybe a little bit more of that tension and that fraughtness, and that in a way that could have played out in certain, to my mind, in certain fashions that I think Star Trek never does overlapping dialogue.
Yeah.
But when you're in a conversation with a bunch of people and you're arguing and it's intense and it's like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? People are speaking over each other all the time because it's like, what the fuck are we going to do? Oh, shut up. I don't know. You don't know what you're talking about. No, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Star Trek always is like, bah, 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 bah. I would have said there are some stylistic changes that could have happened on Star Trek to really make it clear this ain't your daddy Star Trek. But as has been pointed out to me many times, your daddy wanted to watch your daddy's Star Trek. So if we'd done that, we might not have had any audience at all.
Well, like I enjoyed Star Trek Enterprise. I think on the one hand, the only two detractors I ever had against the show, one was the fact that they had the Vulcan. So when they made it to the new planet, the Vulcan had already been there before. I was like, well, you can't have that. You want true exploration, new to everybody. You know what I'm saying? And the other one was, I think, that got me a little bit was, I'm trying to think the best way of phrasing it. Basically, people were still treated like it was in Star Trek, like they were perfect on some level, a little too perfect. I felt they could have gone into the fact that these were non-Federation people. This was
that's what I'm saying, and I think that would have required the show to actually really take a step back from a lot of things. Because it's interesting, you said it didn't look like Star Trek, and yet in some ways I thought it did. That was my problem. It's like you go to the trouble of making this claustrophobic submarine-like set, which I loved. Mm-hmm. But then if you turn the channel, immediately you've landed on a Star Trek show because the lighting is basically the same. The look is very clean. There's not overlapping dialogue. A lot of the things that just tonally and stylistically always mark Star Trek did not change.
So on the show, obviously you play Dr. Phlox, who's I'm gonna butcher the name. Denobulin.
Denobulin, and here's how you can remember that. It's like, where are you from? Dunno.
Denobulin.
Denobulin.
This is why I could not play on Star Trek. I could not handle the jargon.
I understand. The guy did my hair 4 years in and was still always saying exactly what you just said. Nobody could. That's why you never see the goddamn species anymore. It's unpronounceable. Yes, I was a Denobulin.
So you're obviously the first one, and I may be one of the only ones to play
the last one too. I know.
So I mean, did they give you leeway to how you wanted to play the character? Was it because the weird thing about Dr. Phlox is that you're playing an alien we've never seen before, but you're playing in a type of that alien that doesn't behave like the other ones of its species. So you're both playing a new alien, but a different type of that alien we don't know. That must have been a very complex thing to try to perform.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't overthink it because, as you say, the nice thing is, as opposed to getting cast as a Vulcan or as opposed to getting cast as a Klingon, is you got to fit yourself into a box. Being cast as a Denobulin when there was never a fucking Denobulin before, is I felt like I have all the freedom in the world. They're going to end up making the Denobulins be like me. I was the father of my species.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of freedom. And I thought they very clearly in the pilot asked first and foremost for the person, for the actor to be joyous, to have a very grounded but very expansive sense of joy, and that was what they wanted Dr. Phlox to bring. you can create all the backstory in the world about the species, and to a certain extent, I did some of that. But from script to script to script, you're going to find that what they present makes you toss out your Bible anyway. So I didn't worry so much about what made a denobulin as I did think about what is it that defines this person's way of looking at the world, and that also is how you drive the action. When you are somebody who views the world as a marvelous, potentially dangerous, but exciting laboratory set that you get to play with, and what a privilege that is, some of your action becomes to teach and to inspire that way of being amongst others. So to me, Dr. Phlox was first and foremost, in a very gentle way, he was there to teach.
And I think that's one of the things I love about Dr. Phlox is that in the realm of Star Trek, especially after around Next Generation, often the characters of Star Trek were always handled in a very vanilla way. You're not allowed to have too many different emotions. You're not can never get too excited. You can never be too sad. But Dr. Phlox was allowed to be different. He was allowed to be upbeat and popular and positive. And I think is one of the few characters that were allowed to be more than almost military in how they perform.
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that my objection to the show was that it probably needed to be darker when my character was supposed to be light. So
Right.
but yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there were other characters. Data, comes to mind, who in similar ways were expected to bring to the table. I mean, there's always the alien character is always first and foremost expected to challenge the existing mores and way of looking at the world. It's always, designed to be, look in the mirror, see yourself. Now be aware that I am looking at you an entirely different way than you are seeing yourself. All the alien characters are supposed to do that to a certain extent. I appreciated the sensibility that my character brought to the table, because I think in a way it allowed the show to kind of pull humans' pants down. And there is, I think, a need for Star Trek sometime to pull human beings' pants down. Because we start from this place with Star Trek where we say man is perfectible. We've achieved it. We've conquered all this and we've fixed all that. And here we are out in space, basically colonizing, teaching other people how to be, and that can become a little hagiographic. Yeah. So it's good to have somebody to kind of actually go wah, wah.
and like I said, and Star Trek at its best is an allegory, and I think Dr. Phlox also, I thought, existed as an allegory about the kind of like a generational aspect of racism in regard to the Interrans, that he was one of the species that said, I will not just judge them about who they are. I'm going to, kind of be more open-minded about that kind of stuff. And I thought in many ways, Dr. Phlox really embodied the best aspects of Star Trek in the philosophy they're trying to do.
Yes, there was one episode, and that I have very mixed feelings about, the Dear Doctor, because I think his it's a hard thing, the question of what it is to be empathetic and deeply caring and what it is to have scientific detachment. Dr. Phlox makes a decision in that episode to essentially say it is legitimate to allow one species on a planet to die off when you have the medical knowledge to cure them, because that allows another species that is being subjugated to grow into its full potentiality. I wasn't sure I entirely came down on Dr. Phlox's. I mean, I get it. It's a little bit like if just to analogize, if the American Indians had been able to say, hey, you know what? We're going to ship smallpox blankets back to Europe. Would that have been a moral thing to do? Knowing if they didn't, they would die off. Knowing that if they did, Europe would die off. Where do you side on? Where do you land on that? That I thought was an episode where it's like, okay, no. And probably more than any episode that I'm ever asked about with Star Trek fans who kind of want to talk about Dr. Phlox, the episode that people point to and say, so when Dr. Phlox did that, what'd you think? Yeah, I don't know. I hear you.
But it's good that it brings up the conversation, though, which is what Star Trek's good at.
It does. Yeah. And that's, I think, Similitude was another episode. I mean, I would have said that we came into our own, I think, in certain respects, although I always objected to a lot of the aspects of the Zindi arc. But there were episodes in season 3 that I thought were quite good. And there were a lot of episodes in season 4 that I thought were pretty good. Less successful in seasons 1 and 2, some good ones. A lot of ones that I thought, were kind of, hackneyed and that had been done before. But at its best, an episode like Similitude that I think kind of takes a tricky issue. The question of whether or not it's legitimate to clone a human being. And they told that story in a way that made it tense and taut and got everybody involved. And there was an emotional arc to everybody's journey. And there were stakes, high stakes, because the Zindi arc demanded that we move on if we were to survive. So we had to figure out, we got a clone trip. We have no choice. That's when Star Trek works. Sometimes I think the moralistic or the allegorical episodes don't have the tension. Sometimes the tense episodes don't have much of a point.
Well, I think one of my favorite episodes, at least one of my favorite scenes with Phlox was in episode 7, the Enduran incident, where Dr. Phlox is talking about DePaul, and he's talking, and one of the great lines I like is that he recites the Vulcan motto of infinite diversity, infinite combinations, and is trying to get her to feel comfortable working with humans and showing her other Vulcans that she'd worked with, something she's embarrassed about. And I thought to myself, didn't seem like there was enough scenes between Phlox and DePaul, these two aliens who are the only ones of their kind on the ship. I don't feel like they had enough interaction to kind of explore what is that to be the one that is the
outsider. Early on, they clearly, and they have, the producers and the network and the suits and the guys who are ponying up the dough, they have a lot of imperatives. And I think they felt like their primary imperative, of course, is to get people to watch the show. And needless to say, the guy's number 7, the fat guy who's number 7 on the call sheet, probably isn't the guy who's going to get people to tune in. So, let's have the pretty people run around in their underpants, A. and B, let's kind of figure out what made the original show a hit, which is this triangular relationship at the top of the show that kind of brings humor and tension, and some of it is sexual tension in our case, to a cranky, crusty, somewhat loving, but frequently rough-edged triangle. And that left not as much room for the rest of us. I think Dominic and I got to do more than probably Anthony and Linda. But generally speaking, this was a show that was not as much of, to my mind, at least, as much of an ensemble show as I thought it might have been when we started. And I have no judgment on that. I mean, one, I think Connor's a terrific actor and merited every bit of screen time he got. And two, I can understand why they thought that might be the best way to go. But it didn't leave as much room for me to, for my character to develop, I think, in the first couple of years.
It does seem like sometimes Star Trek is kind of formulaic, because I was thinking about Dr. Phlox and the role of doctors on the series, and the doctors on the show have traditionally, it seems like, been what brought the humor to the show. You have Rob Ricardo on Voyager, McCoy, Leonard DeFrost Kelly.
Not so much Crusher, but yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I would say that's like the lone one that I think doesn't quite fit into that. And I mean, is it because they're not part of the crew? You think that lends themselves to be able to have a little bit more freedom to how you performed it, because you're not as stringent on behavior?
Not necessarily. I mean, I will say that I think there's not. This may not have. I don't know my Star Trek as much as doubtless you do, but generally speaking, the Doctor doesn't belong on a bridge. So a lot of the action adventure episodes, a lot of the the Doctor's not in. The Doctor's going to be in the scenes that lend themselves to a little bit more chin wagging, a little bit more like blah 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 blah. So it would make sense that maybe then, whether the Doctor is ruminative and philosophical, or whether the Doctor is kind of crusty and hard-bitten, or whether the Doctor is finding a way through bedside manner to kind of be, amusing and set everybody at ease-ish, the action has more to do with the expression of personality than the pursuing of da, 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 da. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So is it it seems like one of the best episodes to play are the Mirror Universe episodes. Is Mirror Phlox?
I hated those.
Really? Why?
Well, for one thing, it's one note. I mean, I didn't mind doing it as a one-off, playing a little version of Dr. Mengele, and because I didn't have a ton of scenes, it was fine to just be kind of like, "Ooh, I'm going to take his liver out without giving him any." But there's not a ton you can do in that universe. You basically say everybody is evil. Period. End of story. As a lark, it was fine. But I didn't think those 2 episodes really went anywhere, and I would not have particularly wanted to spend a lot of time in that universe, which oddly, I think they might have been intending to do. I loved the theme song. I love the fact that they created a whole evil television show theme song. I thought that was great.
Yeah, actually, I kind of found interesting that the Mirror Phlox actually had some level of compassion, which was weird because he was trying to protect his people, as well a little bit. I was like, well, it's kind of like it was the universality of Phlox, I guess. No matter how evil he is, there's still that part of him that says, I still need to do right by somebody.
I sort of thought, well, it's still joyful. He takes joy in vivisection. But I mean, in that sense, I think it got to be like, I think some of like Trip. I mean, poor Connor. I hated those things. And I think it's because it was harder to kind of find that kind of a behavioral through line from universe to universe. It was easier for me, the way they wrote it, to be able to say, oh, Dr. Phlox in many respects is very similar because he's still somebody who's like delighted as shit to do this stuff. That wasn't quite as playable for the other folks.
Now the final episode, it felt like every character was able to have an arc, but they didn't really do much with Phlox that last episode. Like they forgot to give him that final kind of. I don't think
none of us were too keen on that final episode, as you know. I mean, that has obviously been one of the great unfortunate blots on the 4 seasons we had. Is that the 4th season was a strong season for the most part, but a strong season that did not end well. I think we all tried to be very politic at the time, and all of us, of course, owe a tremendous debt to Rick and Brannon. They gave us jobs. They bought me a house. I will never be anything other than grateful. I understand that for them, the end of Enterprise marked the end of their years at the helm of the franchise. So they wanted to do something that signaled a goodbye to the franchise. For us in the cast, and I think for some of the fans, that was kind of perhaps done to the detriment of our story. And yes, I would agree that for me, there just wasn't, there was no satisfying conclusion to Dr. Flox's journey.
How would you have liked it to have concluded his journey?
Well, I mean, that would be arguing that it goes if it had gone another 3 years, there are a number of things that I would have been interested in seeing them potentially develop, but I don't know that they would have because I was still number 7 on the call sheet. Does Dr. Phlox ever miss home? Does Dr. Phlox ever feel lonely? Does Dr. Phlox ever feel like, he's banging his head against a wall? I mean, Dr. Phlox, got to do a lot of things, but I think there might have been another level of exploration possible to find out what scared Dr. Phlox, lost Dr. Phlox, lonely Dr. Phlox, frustrated Dr. Phlox, homesick Dr. Phlox might have been like. I don't know. That might not have been appropriate. That might not have been worth exploring. I think anytime you're an actor on a show that goes on for years and years and years, you're basically on some level saying, okay, we kind of know that color. We kind of know that. We kind of know that how he is under this situation. What's are there other things to explore? But you don't want to hijack the show to do it. I'd have liked to have seen Dr. Phlox get laid, but that's the one shot he had. My own wife is on the show, my fictional wife, and what does she do? She hits on Trip, for God's sake. It's like, come on. I would have liked to have seen just exactly how the Denobulans mated.
I mean, he had 3 wives. They could have introduced the other 2.
I think he had to have had 3 penises. This is something I would have liked to have seen explored. Yes. And my wife is in the background. I can hear her yelling, saying that, and the gal who played my wife played my wife's daughter in a movie.
Oh, really?
She was particularly outraged. And it's like, how come they cast some young babe to play your wife instead of a more age appropriate actress?
Well, so if you're ever writing your own Star Trek, you're going to introduce the three penis to Noblian.
I never will. I also, in an episode in which I was walking around the ship naked, suggested that I walk into the sick bay, turn sharply to the left, and all the way across the room, a flower pot should hit the ground.
I'm surprised they didn't go with that.
I know they didn't like any of my ideas. All my ideas were crass. Robert Picardo would go in and he'd pitch these, esoteric ideas, and he's an opera singer. And I'd always be like, okay, what if Dr. Phlox, like when he has a gas attack, the fart lasts 10 minutes long? Let's see how long we can sustain that beat. They'd lock the door when they saw me coming.
That's funny. So going on a slightly separate track, you're also the president of the Hollywood Food Coalition. Can you tell our listeners what that is and what do you do as a president?
I'm the president of the board. So in essence, the Hollywood Food Coalition, which has been around for about 34 years, started as an organization that helped deliver services to people experiencing homelessness directly on the streets. We would serve a hot meal every night. We would provide bus passes, laundry vouchers, tents, sleeping bags, clothing, shoes, you name it. As we grew and as we evolved, we moved indoors. We started providing a better meal and more ancillary emergency services and started rescuing more food. When I got involved, we were in the process of making that transition, and a lot of the work that my wife and I, who's also a member of the Food Coalition, are engaged in and were engaged in was to rescue more food to improve the quality of the meal. As we began to rescue more and more food, we recognized that it was possible perhaps to share that food with other not-for-profits. So we expanded into a second facility, which we called the Community Exchange Program. Our nightly meal is called the Community Dinner. The various emergency services we provide, we call Community Wellness. The third program, Community Exchange, all the food we rescue lands there. We cull it, we sort it, we label it, we inventory it, and we share it with anywhere between 30 and 70 participating not-for-profits. And we're trying to provide very personalized concierge-level service so that all of these various groups who are in their own ways supporting people in need are getting great food to build up and to make more robust their meal programs. The natural evolution of all this work is, as we start working with more and more not-for-profits, is to identify areas where we can collectively work to improve the social safety net for more and more people in our community, so that food insecurity becomes less and less of a concern. How are we as a community able to identify more food sources, pick up more food, share more food, refrigerate more food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So we're the Hollywood Food Coalition because we're based in Hollywood. Food is our medium of expression, and coalition means that we are coalition builders, and we're looking to build a community of care providers.
The one thing I found that was very interesting on your webpage, and I don't know if maybe I'm noticing a distinction that may not be necessarily intended, but I notice a very clear distinction that it refers to the people that you work with as clients instead of customers. And I thought that was a very unique distinction. Is there a reason for that distinction?
Yes, and to be honest with you, in the next iteration of our website, they will be guests, which is really the word we use. Clients makes it sound as if we do certainly try and do the very best we can. We have UCLA medical, dental, vision vans come to our campus. We try and connect people to other social service agencies that can help out with mental health issues, legal issues, job referral issues, housing issues. But we are not there as social workers pretending that we can minister to all their problems. We are not trained to do that. Guests, to me, is really the best word, because what we try and do is say, come and have dinner with us. Come and get to know us. Come and get to know each other around a communal table. And let's see if, as a community of people, we can help each other. That's really one of the guiding principles that our executive director, a woman named Sherry Bonanno, who's been with the organization for 20 or so years, has really fought hard to imbue in this organization. The idea that there is a real, strong, compassionate effort to try and meet somebody on the ground where they live, to say, we're not here to judge, but can we help?
So how does a regular person retain the services of your organization?
Well, if we're no barriers organization, so we serve a hot dinner every night, and anybody who shows up on the line gets a dinner, period. Before COVID, of course, we could serve indoors. As we get to know people who come frequently, we are always available to, we're approached. Can you give us, can you give us, can you give us? If we have it, we will give it. We also flip that script and say, tell us a bit about yourselves. Do you have anything that you're looking for that we can help you with? And we try and, as we get to know people, maybe direct them to other not-for-profits. That's the community dinner / community wellness program. The community exchange program, all the food lands there, food that we take to our kitchen to make our nightly meal gets shipped out. All the other food that we have available, we have an intake process. So we spread the word to the community that, if you're interested in being a part of the program, let us know what your needs are. So, for instance, a group home for people who are having mental health issues. They might come to us and say, we've got 25 people in our group home. We have the capacity to cook a meal. We have limited refrigeration. What can you give us? And we will do a conversation with them to try and figure out what their regular needs are. How often do you need food? 2 times a week, once a week, 3 times a week? Some organizations need all the food to already be prepared because they don't have a kitchen. Some organizations are able to cook fairly elaborate meals. They just never had the food delivered on a regular basis. And we also are trying to, in essence, learn to teach ourselves by doing enough about all the intricacies of the community to be able, if an organization calls us and says, hey, crisis, we've got an event. This happened the other day. We're having dentists come to our VA facility to help clean the teeth for various and sundry people living on the streets who are veterans. We're trying to find meals for all the volunteers and all the dentists and our clients. We need about 300 meals. Can you do it? And they called, and it was like on a Tuesday, and we had allocated all of our resources for that Tuesday. But we were able to say, you know what? Let us connect you with Baba, because we work with all these groups.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is what's frequently, I think, missing, in so much of this sphere and in a lot of spheres is that not-for-profits, naturally enough, tend to get siloed. They're understaffed, they're underfunded. It's hard for them to send tendrils out to all of the other not-for-profits that could help support and sustain them. It's viewed as work, which it is, but it's work that might not necessarily be valuable. My argument and my reason for being in this organization is to try and fight to make it be perceived as more valuable.
So when you're trying, obviously you work with, I assume, a lot of people who are homeless. How do you advertise your organization to those who don't have a direct way of getting news because they're not, how do you reach them?
It really does become word of mouth. I mean, the great vast swath of people in Los Angeles are still, for the most part, who are experiencing homelessness, are downtown. But different populations, as the homeless population has burgeoned over the course of the last decade or so, have moved to all sorts of different places all over the city. The people who are choosing to live in Hollywood know about the Hollywood-centric services because, one, we're there every night. So it becomes known pretty quickly if you are living on the streets in Hollywood where you can go to get a good meal every night. And, of course, we're doing what I think a lot of outreach agencies are doing. We're providing information night in, night out. Here's a flyer to tell you where you might be able to go and get a shower every Tuesday. Here's another flyer that will tell you where you can go use a community bathroom. Here's another flyer that will tell you where many people who are experiencing homelessness actually have held onto their phones. So some of the effort is to try and get better as a community. And there are efforts underway, at least in Los Angeles. Every city, of course, has its own, different set of on-the-ground prescriptions for how to grapple. But there are services such as 211 here in Los Angeles, We try and remind people who have phones that 211 is a number to call to find out what's available for your needs. That said, Los Angeles is essentially 88 separate legal entities. LA County is vast. West Hollywood is its own city. Santa Monica is its own city. Beverly Hills is its own city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the government patchwork is extremely complicated, and the services are spread out over a vast geography. And an individual caseworker, it's not as if there's this, extremely streamlined set of processes by which everybody in need gets a caseworker who marches them through every aspect of the system. It's extraordinarily balkanized. Somebody, for instance, who may be eligible for a housing program, but first needs to go to a doctor to make sure that they get a certificate that says they don't have TB. Somebody's going to get them to the doctor, but that isn't the same person that's going to get them into the housing program. The handoff between agencies, sometimes, missed the deadline. As a for instance, the balkanization is really difficult. And for all the money that, that is critical to come down, and I'm so elated that Biden has been able to successfully move resources through the system. I hope that continues. But and money is critical. And the federal government, has the power to do more than any other. It's the biggest driver. The biggest answer to hunger is the food stamp, the SNAP program. That keeps more people from food insecurity than anything else we can possibly do. But every program has to be administered, and it filters down through the state, through the cities, through the localities, into a web of connected not-for-profits. Those not-for-profits need to do a better job working together.
So one thing that you have partnered with for mobile vision and medical aid is UCLA. How did that come about?
I'd say that was about 10 years ago, before my time, but a gentleman named Dr. Walter, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Copenroth, I think is how you pronounce it, was instrumental in encouraging UCLA to give the medical students a chance to take their work out into the community. And we were one of their first partners to say, bring it to us. So particularly since we have moved indoors and are now on a campus. Although we're a secular organization, we work out of the Salvation Army. Again, no barriers, no religious test. Anybody who comes to us for a meal gets a meal. But because we have the consistency and the regularity of a campus, it's a lot easier for people to know that there's going to be that medical van every Tuesday, that vision van every other Tuesday. We try and augment with dentistry or podiatry or et cetera. But the key is UCLA right now. That's what our long-term goal on the community dinner / community wellness front is, to eventually have our own campus where we're able to extend the hours of meal service, the quality of meal service. We'd love to have table service where instead of having to go through a line, people could actually come in for a reservation and like a restaurant. We'd love to be able to be open all day so that people could come in and get a snack or a little light breakfast. We'd love to be able to have other not-for-profits have a presence on that campus so that it could kind of be a one-stop shopping center for people experiencing homelessness or in poverty, instead of having to be fanned out all over the town. And that's a replicable model. That's one of the things we really believe in, is that what we want to try and do is keep building quality services so that people can say, that's a cool model. Let us try and do that where we live. These kind of community hubs where people who are experiencing poverty can come and have a lot of different needs answered. They're stupid things. For instance, a lot of people who are homeless, one of the reasons they can't get a job is because they don't have the ID. And the reason they don't have their ID is because when they were rousted off the street, all their possessions were taken and chucked out, and their ID was thrown out. They don't have access to legal services. If you criminalize homelessness and you start giving somebody who's living on the streets tickets, they can't pay those tickets. Those tickets accumulate. Now they've got thousands and thousands of dollars of tickets unpaid, and that means in the legal system they are a felon, and they can't get a job. So having access to legal services is critically important. Mental health. I could go on and on.
I was going to point out that something in Rhode Island that did this recently. This was maybe a year ago. They made it so it was illegal to give money to homeless people in Providence. If you give money to the homeless, you can be fined yourself for doing it. And it's just the horrible way we criminalize people who are homeless or helping, because once again, homeless people tend not to be able to vote because once you send no ID and they can't. And I find and that really is a very grave shame that we do to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's enormously complicated, and I understand. I mean, Los Angeles right now, it's grown exceptionally squalid, and of course that has as much to do with the fact that during COVID, we have wanted, again, which I understand, it makes perfect sense. We have wanted not to disturb homeless encampments because we don't have shelters to put people in. And frankly, putting people in shelters during COVID is more likely to get them sick than leaving them on the streets. But as homeless encampments grow and they become, no toilets, no waste paper baskets, no sinks. It's where they live, where people live, and the garbage piles up. And it is understandable to me that people in the community say, it is understandable to me that people want to do anything they can to make that problem go away. I get it. It is not irrational to consider that people living on the street near you are a threat. If only an aesthetic threat. It's how people are. It's a real challenge to come up with solutions to these problems without any of us turning to other people and demonizing them for being cruel or cold or callous or NIMBYs. My feeling is that in the end, you have to find a way to keep making tables where everybody can sit and talk and sit and talk and sit and talk. And I say this as a progressive who gets fucking pissed off at MAGA people, so it's not like I'm no fucking saint.
Right.
But in the provision of social services, you are not going to banish folks who are upset that they live cheek to jowl with poverty from the conversation just because they don't seem as empathetic as you are. It's part of the work.
How successful is the Hollywood Coalition doing it, spreading beyond Los Angeles, to spread to further California, to spread to other states, and show that model to the rest of us on how to do and how to help people better?
There's still, in a weird way, it's still baby steps. I mean, we're 34 years old, but up until late 2015, this was an organization that was run by a gentleman who I never met. I mean, he did an amazing job, providing services to the people in his immediate community. But he specifically did not want to be partnered with other organizations. He and I don't mean this pejoratively, but he viewed those collaborations as inherently problematic. They would somehow strip him of his autonomy, of his ability to do it the way he wanted to do it. So it's only after he kind of split, because Sherry Banana, who I referenced earlier, kind of really had kind of a conversation with him, a tough conversation with him and folks in his particular camp, I guess, for lack of a better word, about the challenge of growth and the need to do more, which required more collaboration. In forcing that schism on the organization, it did some great service because it allowed us to start, and again, this is before my time, it allowed the organization to take some interesting and important growth steps. It also fractured the organization, and a lot of the people who funded it and a lot of the people who supported it split. When I joined and when my wife joined in 2017, this was an organization that for 34 years, or for at that time 30 years, had done an amazing job feeding people every night. But it had a budget of under $100,000 a year. It had 2 part-time drivers. It had no paid executive director. It had no development plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't have the infrastructure. My ambition was to build its infrastructure out so that it would be able to do more. So we're still fairly young when it comes to doing more. That turning around to the world at large and saying, let us model that's still, to me, some growth steps away.
Mm.
You know.
So how can our listeners help you and help the Hollywood Food Coalition? Like, what can they do?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you're hearing this and this is in any way striking you as inspirational and something you want to be a part of, there's not a not-for-profit in the world that isn't going to say that they would not welcome your financial contribution. And you could go to hofoco.org, and you could make a contribution via the mechanisms that exist on our website. I'm J Billingsley 60 at Twitter. Feel free to follow me. I'm always, try and pop in every day or so, and I can steer you to our website and Instagram. And I suspect, if you would be so kind, that you were provided with that information, and maybe you could just share it, Jeff, with the gaggle.
Yeah, what we'll be doing when the episode goes live, we'll have several links to the Hollywood Food Coalition, and if you want to send me any other links that would be valuable to them that are a little more specific, we'll add that too.
Yeah, I think I might have put you in touch with Patrick Hudnut, who is our program coordinator, and he can get you anything that you might want and might be valuable to people who are listening. The other thing I kind of say, and I say this a lot, is a deep passion of mine has always been trying to figure out how to be part of the community I live in. What does that mean? When I was a theater actor, that meant building theater companies. When I moved here and I kind of got out of a theater, it was figuring out a not-for-profit to work with that interested me. I worked for the AIDS Service Center for a number of years because being in the theater, I'd lost a lot of people to HIV/AIDS. I think it's really important, above and beyond, my passion for this organization, for people who may still be searching for ways to be involved, is to kind of do a little inventory. What are the things that drive you and animate you and excite you, and how can you connect those hungers and those urges? Is it teaching? Is it reading? Is it social justice? Is it issues of poverty? Is it environmental science? Anything that animates you, that makes you want to, I want to work in this area. There's a place for you to connect in your community. I'm a great believer in not reinventing the wheel. I think if I'm speaking to anybody who's listening above and beyond the Hollywood Food Coalition, I'd say, if you feel this as a hole in your life, do a little research and find out where your potential home is in your home, because there's a home for you. Teaching kids to read, volunteering in a school system, volunteering in a public library. Volunteerism is to me, I think, one of the greatest necessities to rebuilding much of what is broken about our country. There's a selfishness in our country right now, and I don't speak this to the folks who are listening, because I would imagine that probably everybody here, it's one of the great things about Star Trek fans. I think Star Trek fans have a deep passion for involvement. But I think one of the things that's a little broken in our country right now is we think of freedom, and freedom is about my freedom to go after what I want. And we don't think enough about responsibility. And we are great beneficiaries, all of us who are alive today, of hundreds of years of very brave and courageous people who are willing to sacrifice so much so that we could be here. We have a responsibility to give back. And I think much less about my freedoms than I do about my responsibilities.
Is there any, I mean, I assume it's a difficult answer to give, but is there any source that you have that can help people find a version of what you do where they live? Or one that is respected that they can follow along? Yeah,
but I'm a great believer in. I mean, as much as I can loathe aspects of social media and the world we live in, which we've all got, these smartphones kind of like pulling our peckers all the time. It is undeniably true that a little bit of research these days, I mean, just start Googling, not-for-profits in, okay, let's say you're in bumfuck, not-for-profits in bumfuck, not-for-profits in food insecurity, bumfuck, not-for-profits poverty, bumfuck, not-for-profits education, bumfuck. I mean, it doesn't take much. And just make a few phone calls. I mean, really, you come up with one not-for-profit, education. Okay, not-for-profit bumfuck education. Blah, blah, blah exists to yada, yada. Call them. Hey, I'm calling because I'm really interested. Can you give me some other leads? What else is in your community? Who else do you work with? Who are your pals? I mean, one phone call and then you're off on the chase, Then just start making phone calls. we're afraid of the phone. I think it's fun, you know. It's like you pick up the phone and you start saying, "Can you connect me to? Can you connect me to?" Suddenly, man, I mean, it's not hard to find.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Billingsley, so much for talking with me. It was a sincere honor. It was and a great pleasure of mine. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, my honor as well, and I'm happy to have spent some time with you. And you know, look at me, you got me talking all serious. I usually just like making bad jokes the whole time, and this is one of the more earnest conversations I've had.
Well, I think what you're doing with the Hollywood Food Coalition is necessary and fantastic. And hopefully there's more people out there like you than those who are obviously not.
I believe that is true. I mean, I honestly will say, I think that even when I am infuriated at people in this world and people in our country right now, I do think that everybody has this core need, a human need to feel the warmth of giving, and it manifests itself sometimes in ways that would not, you know, perhaps be to my liking, but I do believe the impulse is shared. You know, I'd only say that I think maybe in some instances bending the impulse. You know, the person who's donating time to the NRA, I might wish they would donate that time elsewhere.
Right. Well, thank you so much, sir. I hope you have a great night. Anytime you want to talk, come right back on the show.
Much obliged.
Thank you.
Spaghetti! And we're back.
That's right. We are back. Back in the saddle again. Well, I hope you guys really, really enjoyed that as much as we did making it for you. And if you like what you heard and you want to hear more, you got to go check out Spoilerverse.com, because at Spoilerverse.com, we have a plethora, amazing directors and artists of all walks of life, and editors and writers. And oh my God, are you a lover of comic books like we are? Then there's so many amazing people from the comic book world over at Spoilerverse.com. And I highly implore you to go there and check it out.
Yeah, and while you're there, you can check out all the other podcasts on our network, like Originally Geekdoms and Funny Book Forensics and Haphazard Adventures and Nerds from the Crypt and so many more.
Misery
We put out
Point
episodes
Radio.
all the time. Go check all of them out. And check out all of the reviews and previews and articles we have going up every single day for you. Every day on Spoilerverse.com for you to check out and to read and to love and to like and to comment. We have a store link. If you want to help support the site, you can do it two ways. One, go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/spoilercountry, or go to our store link in the middle of the site there and get a t-shirt, a face mask, a hoodie, something, look fly as hell, and help support the site when you do that, because we get $1 or $2. And, you know, maybe you want to talk to us. If you do, you can do it, you know, obviously on all the socials, but if you go to scpod.us/Discord, you can join our public Discord server and come chat with us all day long.
I couldn't say it better myself, dude.
There you go.
You just mouthed out a ton of information at once. And really, I hope you guys enjoy what you're hearing, because we're working our butts off to bring it to you.
We are.
I guess there's only one left thing. One left thing? Yeah, I'm going to go with it. There's only one left thing left to do.
What's that?
In an oceans of podcasts,
We are Cthulhu.
as Cthulhu compels you to
Spaghetti. Open the mind.
and read more.
Spaghetti.
Do you listen to podcasts that sound like this? Hey, welcome back to the Super OK Podcast, where our audio sounds mediocre.
Or do you prefer podcasts that sound more like this? Crisp, clear, fun, easy to listen to, and full of awesomeness? Well, you should check out Spoiler Country, hosted exclusively over at Spoilerverse.com.